Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my May wrap up. May was a pretty fun reading month. I managed to read 11 books and I enjoyed most of them as well. There were a few I didn't enjoy that much, but overall I just had a lot of fun reading this month. I was very excited about picking up new books, especially towards the end of the month. That resulted in me reading 11 books, which I think is the most books I've ever read in 1 month. And this vibe has come with me into June, and in June I hope to read 14 books in total, because that would mean that at the halfway point in the year I would have read 50 books and that would be amazing. But we'll see how it goes. Right now I'm just having a lot of fun reading and I'm just enjoying that mood. But let's just go through these books because there are quite a few of them. The first book I finished was The Loveliest Chocolate Shop in Paris by Jenny Colgan. I read this while on holiday in Paris and I finished this book on our last day there, so that was quite perfect. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I wasn't blown away by it, but it was a lot of fun to read this in Paris because the main character, what's her name, Anna, she moves to Paris for a couple of months and she's experiencing it all for the first time. Just like me when I was in Paris for only a few days. But it was so much fun to recognize places we were going to each day in this book. This is a contemporary romance story about Anna, like I said, who works in a chocolate factory, but then at the start of the book she has an accident, a pretty bad accident that causes her to lose a few toes, and she's laid off at the factory with a big severance check, but still. And then she doesn't really know what to do, but in the hospital, she's there for quite a few weeks, she meets her old French teacher, Claire, and Claire has cancer and she's very sick, but Anna and Claire form a kind of friendship, and then Claire gives her the idea, or gives her the opportunity, to move to France to work in a chocolaterie alongside a famous and very good chocolatier. And Anna decides to take this opportunity, so she moves to Paris and starts to work under Thierry, and Thierry is actually Claire's former sweetheart. And we actually get 2 timelines within this book. One timeline of Anna in Paris and Claire in the now in England, and then a timeline from years ago when Claire was a young girl in Paris for the first time, falling in love with Thierry. And of course Anna also meets a man and romance ensues. This was a fun book to read, like I said, but I wasn't really blown away by it. I really love Jenny Colgan's books, but somehow I never end up rating them more than 4 stars. Most of them are 3 or 3.5 star books for me. They're just fun reads, but they're not very memorable. In this one the romance wasn't really that amazing. I wasn't really connected to the characters, but because it was set in Paris it was a lot of fun. There was one ableist thing within this book that I didn't really appreciate. Like I said, at the start of the book Anna loses a few toes and she suffers from a lot of pain or phantom pain in the toes that she has lost. This is a source of a lot of insecurity for her as well throughout the book, but then towards the end when she kisses the main man, she somehow feels whole again. I'm not entirely sure if those words were literally used, but it's definitely the sentiments. For the first time since the accident she doesn't feel any pain in her phantom toes, and that just left a really bad taste in my mouth. Like romance can heal this pain, and also the whole idea of feeling whole again, it felt a bit ableist. The next book I finished was an audiobook and it was Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness. These are his memoirs. He opens up about his life. For those of you who don't know, Jonathan Van Ness is one of the Fab Five from Queer Eye, and Over the Top tells his story from childhood in Quincy, Illinois, I think, to getting the job in Queer Eye and becoming famous. And he has suffered through addiction. He's also HIV positive. He suffered through a lot of bullying. He's had a very hard life basically. He was also sexually abused. So if any of these things are triggering for you, maybe not listen to this book. I thought it was a very good memoir. I also very much enjoyed that it was narrated by Jonathan himself. I really enjoyed that because I love his voice and it was like him telling his life story to me. I don't really listen to audiobooks quite quickly. It usually takes me about a month to listen to one audiobook because I listen to it on the bus to work or sometimes while doing chores, but never really in great big chunks like more than 20 minutes. But this one I listened to part of it on the train home from Paris, and then when we were back home I listened to the final few parts of it over the next couple of days, and I was just so engrossed in this story. It made me feel very hopeful for the future that people like Jonathan Van Ness are now famous and are role models for the younger generation. So yeah, I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I finished was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was one of my most anticipated releases of 2021, but I've only picked it up now. And I read this for the Buzzword Reading Challenge because the challenge for May was to read a book with a direction in the title. So up, down, north, south, anything that has a direction in it. Rising has a direction in it. It's upwards. So I decided to pick this up, and I'm very glad that I did because I loved this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. This story is set in Malibu and it tells the story of the Riva siblings Nina, Jay, Hud and Kit, and their parents Mick, Riva and June, I think she's called. It tells their love story as well. So we get 2 timelines. We get the now, when the Riva siblings are preparing for their annual party. They throw an end of summer party each year and it's always a blast, it's always a big party. But this will definitely be the party to end all parties, and we already know that it is going to result in a fire in Malibu. We get to know that at the start of the story. And this timeline is set over 1 day, so it starts at the morning of the party and it ends when the party is over. And the other timeline is set over a much longer period of time because it is a timeline of Mick meeting June, them falling in love, Mick rising to fame because Mick Riva is one of the most famous rock stars ever. In this book, it's their love story, it's them having children, and it is them falling apart. It is very messy, it is very real. I just felt like these were such real characters. All of the children felt real to me, but Mick and June also felt very much real to me. It is the story of how Nina had to step up and be there for her siblings through a lot of hardship. It is a story of all of them finding themselves and who they are and who they want to be in life. This party is also such a magnificent setting for this story because we get the day leading up to the party, but then the party happens about, I think maybe halfway through the book, I'm not entirely sure. But so much shit goes down at this party. It's so good. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing. I loved it in The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and also in Daisy Jones and the Six, although that's a very different format. And I loved it in this one as well. It just completely drew me in. It was such a good reading experience. I loved the setting of Malibu as well. So yeah, definitely 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished was Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is the second book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. These are romance novels about 3 sisters. The first one was Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which I read 2 years ago and really enjoyed a lot. It was amazing. Such good writing, such good chemistry between the characters. So I was excited to pick up the second book, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, which is about the middle Brown sister. But it has taken me until now to actually pick it up and read it. I read it as an ebook, but I'm now considering getting all 3 books in this trilogy because I like them so much. And Take a Hint, Danny Brown is about Danny Brown. Danny is a PhD student. She works at a university and she has a fun banter-like thing going on with the security guard there, Zav. And she finds him very attractive, he finds her very attractive, but they're both definitely not acting on their mini crushes because Zav is looking for romance and Danny is looking for fun, non-committal, one-night stands, maybe friends with benefits kind of thing, because she has had a lot of bad luck in relationships in the past. But then something happens. There is a fire drill at the university and everyone rushes out of the building, but Danny gets stuck in the building, and even though this is a fire drill and nothing is actually going on, Zev rushes into the building to get her out, and he carries her out in his arms for everyone to see, for the entire university to see, and it is filmed and put up on Twitter, and then the video starts trending. Zev is made to see this as an opportunity. He really doesn't like social media, he doesn't like being in the spotlight, but he has his own non-profit organization and he really needs to get more attention to this organization. And then because of this video, people start to see him, they start to connect him to this non-profit organization, and he all of a sudden gets all of this media attention. So then he and Danny decide that they should start fake dating to keep up this charade, to make sure this attention keeps coming, so that his non-profit organization can really start to become bigger. Danny agrees to this. What happens is a lot of fake dating hijinks. Of course, we all know where this is going because this is a romance novel. But what I love about Talia Hibbert's romance novels is that there is more going on than the romance. It's definitely the focal point of the story. But both of these characters, we get the story from both of their perspectives, have much more going on. Zav has lost his father and his brother in a tragic accident and is traumatized because of that for multiple reasons. And Dani has this thing going on with her commitment issues and with not wanting to get close to people. And then both of them also have their families. Dani, of course, has her 2 sisters, and Zev has his mother and his sister-in-law and his niece. And those are very strong units as well, and I loved seeing them interact with those family units. And it was just such a fun book. I didn't give it the full 5 stars because at times I found it a bit repetitive in describing Dani's feelings about Zev, but also about her commitment issues. I think it could have been a bit dialed down in that sense, because at times I was getting a little bit frustrated thinking, I know about this, you've told me this 4 or 5 times already. But it was a fun read. I had a good time reading this. I would really recommend these books. Dani is also a bisexual character. Zev is a Muslim character, so there's great representation here as well. Not just your average run-of-the-mill white people romance novel, so that was also fun. Next up, I finished The Strawberry Thief by Joanne Harris. This is the 4th book in the Chocolat series, and in 2020 I think I started a reread of the entire series just so that I could get to this one. And this was a good idea in theory, but I didn't like all of the books as much as I remembered. I still adore Chocolat. It's still one of my favorite books. I think it's great magical realism. It's absolutely wonderful. But the second book, The Lollipop Shoes, was definitely a disappointment for me. I remembered absolutely loving it, but I really didn't. I think I gave it 3 stars, maybe 2.5, something like that. It was a disappointment. And then the third book was even more of a disappointment, Peaches for Monsieur le Curé. I'm pretty sure I gave it 2 stars, even though the first time I read it I gave it 4 or 5 stars because I loved it so much. Now I saw a lot of problems with it. I thought it was too long and too repetitive concerning the previous 2 books. So I was a little bit apprehensive before picking this up, the 4th book in the series, the thing this reread thing was all about. And I was right to be apprehensive because I did not like this. I gave it 2 stars and I would have DNF'd it if not for this whole thing leading up to this book. I figured it would be a pity if I DNF'd it after rereading the first 3 books and it taking me so long to finally get to this one. So I finished it, but the ending was actually the weakest point of the book. This tells the story of Vianne and her daughter Rosette, who are now back in Lansquenet-sous-Than, which is the village the first book starts at. They are no longer newcomers, they are part of the town now. And it's all about Vianne being scared to lose her daughters. Anouk is now in Paris, she lives there with her boyfriend, and Vianne is very concerned about this. And Rosette is still living with her. She is now 16 years old and she doesn't talk. She is mute mostly and she doesn't go to school. I think she is autistic, but that word is never used in this book. And towards the end some things happened that almost cure her of her disability, which is a bit strange. It's also about Father Renaud, who was also part of the first and the third book. Again, it's quite repetitive. It does have some new themes. There were some storylines in the past that I did enjoy, but overall I'm just very disappointed in this book. Even the writing style wasn't as good as in the first couple of books, because even though I didn't enjoy the second and the third book as much as I did the first time, the writing style was still great. But in this one it felt too forced. It felt like a gimmick almost. Yeah, didn't enjoy this one, unfortunately. Unfortunately, the next book I finished was also one I didn't enjoy. It was a Dutch book and it's called De jongen die van de klif sprong en zacht terecht kwam, and it's written by Stefan Raadgever, and the title of this translates to The Boy Who Jumped Off the Cliff and Landed Softly. This is a young adult contemporary novel about a 19-year-old boy called Alec. He is still in high school. He has had a bit of a tough high school career. He's just trying to pass his exam so he can leave high school behind and go live his life. And it's also about him finding his identity, coming to terms with it. He has always repressed certain feelings about his sexuality, but then a new boy comes to school and he kind of falls in love with him. It is his story about finding himself. It's also about his friends, about this last year at high school. I couldn't connect to it at all. I read this over the course of one day because it's quite short and it's in my native language, so I could read this a little bit quicker. But I just never connected to the story. I never connected to the characters. I thought they were annoying. They weren't good people. I especially didn't like Alec. He just felt like a bit of a pushover. He felt like a bit of a coward, not because of his sexuality, just because of the way he does certain things within this book, how he acts around his friends. I just didn't like it. I was mostly just annoyed and frustrated while reading this book. It's also a little bit sexist and misogynistic, at least the book itself isn't, the characters are towards the girls at school. And I just don't enjoy that. I don't want to read about boys being sexist, objectifying women. No, I've had enough of that. So this was a 2-star read for me. Next up I read The Woman, the Mink, the Cod and the Donkey by someone whose name isn't on the cover, which is weird. Marjorie Swash, and the illustrations are by Emmanuel Santos. This is an affectionate parody of The Boy, the Mole. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse? I think The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. This is an affectionate parody of that. This is much shorter. It's very similar in terms of the illustrations. It's set during lockdown. It's about a woman who wants to find a pub and wants to find something to drink. And during her journey, she meets a mink, a cod and a donkey, and they go on this journey together to find a pub to have a drink. It's a lot of fun. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was a fun parody. I do think the original, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, is good, but also a bit too sweet, too saccharine. I remember really liking it while I was reading it, but it's also just a lot of one-liners, one after another. My biggest gripe with the story was that it doesn't have a real storyline. It doesn't really tell a story, and this one tells more of a story. It was funny, it was witty, but ultimately it felt a bit too similar to The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. Next up I finished another audiobook, and this was another one that I listened to quite quickly, and it was 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. And this book kind of made me come to the realization that I really like listening to memoirs or non-fiction books and thrillers or mystery novels. It just makes me want to keep on listening because the story is so exciting and there are more reveals. I gave this book 4 stars. It is definitely a mystery novel for book lovers because it is about a man who owns a bookstore. Years ago he wrote a blog post about 8 Perfect Murders in which he describes the murders in mystery novels that he thinks are the perfect murders, such as Strangers on the Train, some Agatha Christie novel, I think the ABC Murders by Agatha Christie, and a couple of other books. And then one day he is approached by an FBI agent who tells him that it seems like someone is using his list to commit the perfect murders. So this man, I think his name is Mel, it's told through the first person perspective, so then you don't really get to hear his name much, but he is drawn into this murder investigation because he is also a suspect in this murder investigation. It's about him trying to find out what is really going on, who this person is. We also get to learn a lot about his past, and like I said, it's told through one first person perspective, and it is kind of his memoir. So he's also talking directly to the reader at some point, which was very interesting in terms of narrative style. And I really enjoyed this, like I said. It was also a really great book to listen to because it is a memoir. Maybe I just really enjoy listening to memoirs. Because like I said, he sometimes does address the reader, which works very well when you're listening to it, when the story is told to you. I thought the writing was good. This is something I notice a little bit less when I'm listening to audiobooks. I am much more likely to really notice the writing, the quality of the writing, when I'm physically reading the book with my eyes. This did really draw me in. I was excited to listen to this book. I listened to it in only a couple of days. I did think the ending was a little bit weak, but I often think that with mystery or crime novels because I think it's very difficult to really end a mystery novel in a satisfying way. I really enjoyed this story. I enjoyed that these classic crime or murder mystery stories were a part of it. Although I would look up which stories are part of this before you listen to it or read it because there are spoilers for those stories in here. So for example, I'm very glad that I read The Secret History last year because otherwise that one would have been spoiled for me upon listening to this story. This story was just a great ride. I do think I'm going to try to listen to more thriller or mystery novels on audio because earlier in the year I listened to When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole and I really loved that listening experience as well. So I might just have found a genre that works really well for me on audio. Next up I finished Finding Home Volume 1 by Hari Connor. This is the first volume in a graphic novel. There are 4 volumes in total and this was part of a Kickstarter campaign because this author has been working on these graphic novels for a really long time. I think they've actually won prizes as well. The story is on Tapas. I'm not entirely sure, one of those webcomic platforms, and they've been printing the story as well, but because of circumstances they can't keep doing that anymore, so they used a Kickstarter campaign to print one final batch of all of these books along with a new volume 4, but they also for a lower price made it possible to get all of these books in PDF, and I decided to go for that one because the 4 books plus the shipping to the Netherlands was just a bit too excessive. Now I'm regretting that a little bit, because the reason why I didn't want to pay full price for the physical copies of this graphic novel is because I'd never read it. So maybe I was buying 4 volumes in a graphic novel series for a lot of money that I wasn't going to enjoy, and that was a bit too big of a gamble for me. But I read the first volume, I ended up giving it 5 stars. It's really, really good. It's really beautiful as well. And now I can no longer buy the physical copies. So that is a bummer. You can still read this online, I think, if you want to read it as well. This is a fantasy graphic novel series about 2 characters, Chappie and... I'm blanking on the other guy's name, but they're traveling together through a forest. They are trying to get one of the characters home. Janek, I think his name is. Well, they're traveling together, they are getting to know one another, they are strangers at the start of the book, and we're getting to know both of their backstories, we're getting to know more about this world, although it's still a little bit vague at the end of volume 1, so I'm hoping there will be more backstory in volume 2. And I think it's about them falling in love. It's definitely a slow burn romance. There's also discussions of trauma and anxiety in here, and I just really loved it. I was fully engrossed while reading this. And it was just really, really good, and I really want to read the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th volume, which I think I'm going to do this month. Next up, I read my favorite book of the month, and that was An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is one of the books that was on my list of 10 books to read in 2022. The Strawberry Thief by Joanne Harris was also on that list, by the way. I forgot to mention that. I put this book on the list because it has been on my shelves for quite some time, and I never pick it up. I never feel the urge to pick it up, even though I do want to read it at some point. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought it. So I put it on the list, and then at the end of May, I suddenly felt the urge to pick it up. And I did so, and I'm so glad I did, and I'm kicking myself for not picking it up earlier, because this is such a good book. I think one of the reasons why I didn't pick it up sooner is because this is a very divisive book as well. Some people really love it, some people really didn't like it. There seems to be not much of an in-between. And I think I get why, because the writing style in this book is very distinctive. And I think that if you don't enjoy the writing style or the narrative style of this book, it's hard to really enjoy the story. This is a speculative fiction story. It's about April May, great name. She is 23 years old and she stumbles across a giant sculpture in New York City at 3 a.m. when she's coming home from work. And she decides to film a YouTube video along with her friend Andy. They film a video of this giant sculpture because it seems like a great art project that someone has done. And then overnight this video gets a lot of views. Like a lot of views, because it turns out that this statue didn't just appear in New York, but also in 60 other cities around the world. They all appeared at the same time. No one knows how they got there. No one knows who put them there. No one is claiming this for their own, whatever it might be. Suddenly April and Andy are famous, and they are asked to appear on news shows, on late night shows. They are contacted by agents. Everybody wants something from them, and at the same time everybody is still trying to figure out what these statues are doing there. In their video, April calls this statue Carl, so then the rest of the world also starts calling all of these statues the Carls. April and Andy decide to capitalize on this moment. They decide to go along with it, and they make more videos about Carl. April starts to lose herself in this a little bit. She loses who she is and starts to become the carefully constructed brand of April May that she and Andy and their agent have made. Pretty soon they find out that the Carls might not actually be from this world, and that brings on a whole slew of new problems. I love this book. I absolutely adored it. I bought the sequel right away and I hope to read it soon, because this ended in a way that made me want to scream. The story is told through the eyes of April May. She is looking back on everything that happened, and she also talks to the reader directly. It is definitely a distinctive voice. She has a very distinctive voice. Either you like it or you don't. Either you like her or you don't, I think. I really enjoyed this narrative device of having her look back on the story, of having her narrate this and commenting on things she wish she would have done differently, and saying things like, later on I would come to really regret this. I really loved that. It made me even more interested and intrigued and invested. And I also really love this look at YouTube, at fame, because it's essentially about what fame does to a person, what it means to be famous. I really loved that, seeing how this changed April and Andy and seeing how this massively changed and influenced the course of their lives. It was fascinating to me. I was engrossed the entire way through. And if you like anything that I just mentioned, I would highly recommend picking up this book. And then the 11th and final book I finished in May was a short poetry collection in Dutch. It's called Vaalvaran onder de betovering, which basically means we were under the spell, and it's written by Ramzi Nasser. This is a little poetry collection that was given out as a gift in bookstores for the Poetry Week in the Netherlands in March, February. I'm not entirely sure anymore. And these poems aren't entirely written by Ramzi Nasser because they are constructed out of fragments of the letters written by Vincent van Gogh during his life that he wrote to his brother, to other people. And Ramzi Nasser used these fragments of these letters to construct poems. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I'm not a big poetry reader. I've mentioned that before on this channel, and this is very short. It's only 11 poems. I think I finished it in 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops. There's something about knowing that this is from Vincent van Gogh's letters. I really like Vincent van Gogh as a historical figure. I really love his paintings. I think he's absolutely fascinating. It was just a lot of fun to read this, and they're great poems as well. So I would say I recommend this, but there's no way to get these anymore. And for people who aren't Dutch, this isn't interesting at all. But yeah, really love this. So those were all the books I finished in May. There were quite a lot of them. I have no idea how long this video is going to be. We'll see. Please let me know in a comment down below what was your favorite book you read in May. For me, it was definitely an absolutely remarkable thing. Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future. And have a wonderful day. Bye!